everyone. Welcome to another Talos Roundtable. This time we're going to be talking about Snort 3 today. So I am really excited that we put together this awesome panel for us to talk about Snort 3, the benefits of Snort 3, and basically the crazy life cycle it's had and the years of work that have gone into this. So I am eventually going to turn everything over to Joel, who is going to be leading the discussion today. But first, I just wanted to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. Joel, why don't we start with you and just talk a little bit about what your role exactly is with Snort.
My role is Snort. My name is Joel Essler. I am I run the open source community here at Cisco, and that's what I do.
And we are super excited that we were able to get Marty on, basically the Snort father, Snort godfather, however you want to phrase it.
Yes, good to be here. Marty Rush, original author of Snort, so kind of plug away in the background here and there.
And then we have Russ Combs, who works on the Snort product team.
Yeah, hi, I'm Russ Combs. I am the Snort 3 architect, or one of the Snort 3 architects at this point. I've been working on Snort since 2007, so it's been a long time.
And then lastly, Patrick Mullen from Talos. He is one of our rule writers on the DRT team.
Well,
he writes rules.
It's obviously way more than that.
So yeah, it's been a while since I was a rule writer, but I joined DRT. I was one of 6 people, so we wrote a lot of rules back then. Now I act as liaison between the rule writers and the Snort engineers, helping guide what is important to us and not important to us on a detection standpoint, among other things. Also, the big thing, which will be relevant later, is the working on the new packaging system for Snort 3 rules, where we bring both the same package for product as we provide to open source users.
Well, hey guys, good to see all of you, all of your shining faces. I talk to all of you almost every day, so it's kind of cool to see all of you. So I kind of wanted to start off with probably with Marty, because that would probably be a good place to start. And certainly talk about, since we're going to focus on Snort 3 in this particular instance, talk about the beginning, the origin of the original Snort 3, which I remember seeing you writing in 2005. And so it was actually my first day of work. We were in San Francisco, and I looked over on Marty's laptop and I was like, "What you doing?" He's like, "I'm writing Snort 3. So it's that was an interesting time, and so I kind of want to toss it over to you, Marty, and see what if you could talk about that initial instance of Snort 3 and what happened with that, and we can all kind of chime in there.
Sure. So way back in the halcyon days of the early days of Sourcefire and kind of whatever midterm days of the Snort 2.x architecture. So there are a number of things that I was trying to do with Snort 3 back in the day. Trying to abstract out certain areas of Snort, like the DAC now, the data acquisition system, things like that. Was to some degree atoning for the sins of my youth with the rules language and how that had come to be, which was essentially the Snort rules language has exactly one feature, which is you can add stuff to it later. Because when I originally designed it, the only thing that I really understood about developing the treatment detection language is that I was probably not going to do it right, so I needed to be able to add stuff later. There were a bunch of things that were driving the early days of the system, trying to kind of normalize the architecture, looking at kind of multi-processing versus multi-threading. So there was a lot of experimentation going on in there. Also trying to come up with some degree of smoother pipeline for getting the packets from basically the network interface into the detection engine and then doing something intelligent with them and getting back out of the system. So, there were a lot of goals in the early days, and to some degree, we are 15, 16 years later, and there's a lot to bite off, especially with a system like Snort that was so successful as it stood at the time. The architecture that we came up with back in the very early days really stood the test of time. It's like a bulldozer, it just works. It just kind of does its thing, and it's kind of bulletproof. It's finicky to some extent, but it just keeps going and going. So Snort 3 was really looking at different architectural directions and just dealing with some of the stuff that I feel like I didn't do very well in the original version of Snort, which, or the original architecture of Snort, which, how bad could it have been, given that we ran at it for 22 years. So, that's kind of the impetus.
Yeah, I remember during that history, we got to a point as a company where we're like, okay, let's start testing this thing. And we started running load tests and performance tests on it, and we found out that it wasn't what we had hoped. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, this is really going back now. So this got down to CPU architecture, as I recall, and really the fact that the Intel chips were really extremely well suited of the day. Were extremely well suited for running databases in high performance, but not so much for kind of the I/O demands of the retrieval prevention system. And we were running into cache performance issues going between L1 and L2 cache pretty frequently. This is here, Joel. You really
we went down the nerd trail pretty hard.
It's like stump and jump with me. Hey, Marty, you remember this technique we had 15 years ago? It's like,
get on that, would you?
Anyway, they got people from Intel involved, and inside Intel, they actually had people who, Snort was one of their kind of benchmarking frameworks that they used to kind of take a look at how their CPUs were performing in less traditional ways, which was kind of interesting for us. We kind of got to the point where it was like, well, you're seeing all this kind of maladaptive cache behavior because of just the way the chips are architected and the way software is interacting with it. And we really needed to come up with a more cache-friendly way of doing things if we were going to get past that speed. But once again, getting back to by hook or by crook, the Snort 2.x architecture just kind of worked, and we kept making it work, which was always kind of amusing for me.
Still making it work.
Works great.
It works great.
Millions of packets served.
And part of what helped to keep going was that we took some of the lessons from Snort SP and ported them into Snort 2. So we took the DAC, right? There were a number of performance tweaks that wound up going in there as well. And eventually, of course, we integrated App ID, which was one of the concepts of Snort SP, having the multiple analyzers in the engine.
Yeah, there are a lot of things I was trying to kind of experiment with there. Luckily, did kind of make its way into the core code base as well, which is gratifying for me. As the CTO, you don't get to write production code as much as you do in the extremely early days of the company, or back when I was just writing Snort before SourceFire. So it's nice to see at least the ideas, even if the implementation prototypes were not quite production ready, the ideas stood the test of time.
Yeah, so it's the original Snort, what we deemed as Snort 3, we started talking about Snort 3, was a little controversial because of various issues, but we eventually turned that code into what Russ was just talking about with the Snort SP. And like Russ was just talking about, a lot of those ideas that we carved out of Snort SP and brought into the Snort 2 architecture, like one of the examples is multi-threading, right? A lot of people don't know that Snort 2 does have multiple threads in it, buried in there for reloading and things like that. And a lot of people don't pay attention to that. But I think we've kind of caught up to the point now in the timeline where SourceFire started to grow as a company, and we acquired some outside businesses, and we started to focus on endpoint, we started to focus on firewall and things like that. And so we kind of put the development and the movement of a great architecture shift from Snort 2 to Snort 3 kind of in the background for a minute while we kind of focused on the rest of the company. And so I think that's where we're at in the timeline, if my memory serves me correctly. But I think where it really centered, and I'm trying to think of the date, maybe Patrick or Russ, you guys can help me out with this, but I want to say it was like 2011, 2012, when we started sitting around and going, we need to start over from the very beginning. Patrick, do you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, this probably around that time. It was a little after the Razorback project got started, which was a completely different strategy. The issues that we were having with the older architecture were starting to really show themselves. It's being able to, since networks were getting faster, we needed to have the engine look at more things at a time, be able to collate them together on the backplane. That's one of the things that we're looking for in Snort 3, along with sharing different configurations and everything else. And there was just a lot of things that, like we said before, the Snort 2 engine was and still does work great, but there are just these other little things that just needed to be worked on, to be improved.
Yeah, and I remember one of the kind of the milestones in my head is you and me and Russ and I believe it was Steve Sturgis saying, okay, if we're going to start Snort 3 over, what should it be? Right? And I remember us sitting in that room kind of chatting it out, writing it on a whiteboard of like the idea of Snort 3 again and how we needed to get engineering and development resources behind it, and how we needed to convince Marty to convince the rest of the company to make this happen. So, Russ, I don't know if you have any comment on that you want to throw out.
Well, I mean, yeah, we had that meeting. I was in 2012 or so. I was lobbying pretty hard to start over again, based on the work that we did with Snort SP, and we had added in file carving, and we had added in app ID, and then the plugin for the NGFW, and it just became like an order of magnitude more complicated, and things started breaking down along the multiple policy and the policy split between the NAP or the inspection policy and the IPS policy. So it was really, and reloads added another vector of frustration. So it was really getting hard to add new functionality.
Well, I remember the meeting where it happened. I still have the slide deck somewhere. Is I remember the meeting where we were all sitting and we were convincing the engineering leaders at the time, like, we need to do this. And basically, can we just carve Russ off and let Russ work on it by himself? I remember that distinctly, that meeting.
And if I could just mention, Russ mentioned a word in there, the modular. That's really, to me, that's a driving reason for Snort 3. It makes it so much easier to to add new features, now they're called inspectors, but new processors. So I remember years ago, I was given the go-ahead to add a new preprocessor and rule options to Snort 2, and then I looked at what was involved in doing it, and I decided, you know what, maybe not. But meanwhile, now that Snort 3, Talos has actually already written new inspectors, new rule options, everything else. It just slides right into the nice new modular architecture.
Well, you mentioned earlier, part of what made Snort 2 so robust was that, you do the decode and then you get into this preprocessor phase where you could just plug in a whole bunch of functionality, whatever you needed. And that served us well for a really long time. But eventually, it just started getting really crufty in there.
You end up with dependencies like, the most classic one, obviously, being stream reassembler, between all these different preprocessor modules and things like that. And, without having really kind of cleaned lines of communication between them and clean delineations between functionality and things like that, eventually just it's hard to add new stuff. And that's kind of the thing that I was starting to see even back in the extremely early days when I was starting to experiment, was that it was getting hard to add new things to the system because you had this web of interdependencies that would crop up anytime you tried to do anything kind of fancy.
And that was actually one of the, as Patrick mentioned, one of the goals was to make it more pluggable. Over the years, and surely way before my time, but from when I was there, the amount of open source contributions started tapering down, right? Because it got more and more complicated, and it was becoming more mature and more fully featured, but also much harder to add things to it if you weren't a full-time dev. So one of the goals with Snort 3 was definitely to make it extensible. So, there's several different types of plugins. And the thing you called out, Marty, with the interface between Stream and the other preprocessors, we actually have, a Stream splitter that is the interface between the two. So it's a proper subclass of something in the framework. And I think it's much more extensible. And in addition, with all these plugins, we have inspection events. So you can actually write arbitrary plugins, arbitrary inspectors, and they can collaborate and communicate through these events without having to update the framework. So we tried to address a lot of those problems. I think we made good progress, but there's still work to do.
So we're in the timeline, I think in my head, we're around 2012, 2013. The Cisco acquisition was about to take place, or had just taken place, or is taking place. Now we're 2020, 2021. Russ and whoever else. Why don't we talk about what happened during 2013 and 2020? A lot.
Really? Do we have that much time? I mean,
I know, right? High level. Yeah.
No. So what happened is that I was kind of naive enough to think that the rewrite of a core application was actually doable. And it turns out that all those things, all those things that people talk about, like resources getting diverted and always playing catch up, right? They actually factored in, and so they really stretch our timeline out considerably as priorities sort of ebbed and flowed to innovating in Snort 3 versus trying to chase parity, right? And so it was a real struggle. I know when the acquisition was announced, there was some fog online about, whether Cisco was really going to back this open source project.
Right.
And luckily they did. I mean, we did. And it was really good to see, because it took quite a few years to get through, all of that parity development and all this other stuff, because we had to support the product while this was happening. And I remember it was a couple of years ago, we were trying to push really hard to get this fundamental core part into FTD, and there was no interest. But I remember Marty, we ran into Marty at one point, and he's like, it's going to be another couple of years from where we're at. It was another 3 years, but it was just, so we, along the way, we adopted Agile, right? This Agile development methodology, and that immediately slowed us down. There was a lot of learning there. We had to, assign points to stories, and there was overhead going on, and we had Victor, remember Victor? He would always choose the next biggest Fibonacci number that he learned. So when we eventually tried to standardize on what points meant, I was like, well, what are you doing? He's like, I'm trying to win. He's trying to score the most points. So
that's not how points work.
There's a lot of lessons learned with Agile. and just bringing more people on board. We built out the CI/CD pipeline. We're constantly that's like a never-ending thing where we're constantly adding tests and adding capability, like fuzz testing and long-term stability testing. So it took a long time for the project to mature, to bring in all these new people, get up to speed, and actually try to get some sort of regular cadence to it.
Yeah, well, sorry I was right about that, but one of the things I eventually learned through School of Hard Knocks was kind of estimating how long it was going to take to get things to actually ship, especially in mature products.
Sure. It's difficult to move an architecture from what we were at SourceFire onto different pieces of hardware and different pieces of deployment with the Cisco hardware and things like that. And completely new development processes in a completely new company, all at the same time. Hey, let's rip out this core piece of functionality and replace it with this completely new core piece of functionality. What's the difference between this one and this one? I think we can let's go ahead and jump into that. And I don't know if we're jumping too far ahead there, but I think it's a decent segue in the conversation is, what's the difference? There's a ton, right? But let's keep it simple. What's the difference between Snort 3 and Snort 2? And I don't mean for us, right? I mean for the user. We know there's a lot of differences for us being in the Talos organization, what was the VRT, and especially for the development group, there's a lot of differences. But for the end user, why do they care? Why do they care about this?
It's about the ease of use. If they do any of the tech, it makes it so much easier to write your own rules. If you're, one of the organizations that has any inclination in that, the rules language makes so much sense. If you write Snort 2 rules, they're still familiar. It's just better. I like to say that it's what happens after 20 years of using the Snort rules language. You figure out what works and what makes life easier. So that's a large thing. I mean, being the engine, a lot of stuff is behind the scenes, but once you have to try to tweak anything, it just makes it so much easier. And one of the things that also makes it easier is Snort 3, they put a lot of effort into making sure that it had same defaults. Most of the inspectors, you can just configure them with no configuration, and the built-in configuration just takes care of everything for you instead of having to dig down deep into figuring out what makes sense for your network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing, I think those are really good points. Another thing that a user would care about is that Snort 3, you mentioned multiple threads for Snort 2, but it only ever had one packet thread. And with Snort 3, you can have as many packet threads as you configure, and you don't have to stand up multiple processes, right, and have to manage all of that. So it's much easier to leverage the multi-core systems that are available today. That's one of the key goals, is to make it more scalable and we use a lot less memory in that sense too, because things like building out all of the rule state machines for the fast patterns, you only have to do it one time. It's shared across all the packet threads, right? So if it takes a gig or 2 gigs, whatever it is, there's just one instance of that, as opposed to one per packet thread, which is what you get with one per process in Snort 2. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of other things, like people used to hate on HTTP inspect, the preprocessor, right? Because it was provisionally stateful and it was extremely quirky, to say the least. So there's a whole rewrite, brand new inspector for that. We actually support HTTP 2 as well now. And there's a host of other features that are in there as well.
You're acting like parsing HTTP is hard or something. I don't understand what people think.
HTTP parsers is like where the love of traffic inspection goes to die.
How much of that Snort 2 code is actually in Snort 3?
So, I mean, it's a combination, right? So we wrote a framework, which is entirely new code. We rewrote several core pieces like the stream TCP parsing, the HTTP inspection, and stuff like that, and then we ported and adapted some of the other things. So, for example, port scan, which Patrick is intimately familiar with, we ported that, but we made that, completely configurable through Lua. So there's a whole bunch of enhancements there, but there is still some code that we've ported over. We haven't yet had a need to rewrite or been able to prioritize rewriting it yet. So, it's all based on the testing and how that looks.
Snort 3 makes our lives as rule writers, as detection people, super easy, right? And so, Patrick, you talked a little bit about the Snort 3 rules language, and I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit more just because it's different. It's not Snort 2. It's Snort 3. It looks familiar, but it operates completely differently. Pat, you want to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of Snort 3 versus Snort 2?
Sure. From a purely rules writing perspective,
right.
In Snort 2, if you're using any of the alternative data buffers, we were talking about HTTP earlier. If you're going through and say you're just doing a simple check on a URI, every single content match, it's content blah, HTTP URI, content something else, HTTP URI. So when you're trying to read a rule and figure out what's going on with it, trying to figure out why it alerted or why it's not alerting or whatever, the way you read it is content, okay, I'm looking for this. Oh, it's in this buffer. Okay. And you get to the next one. Now I have a new content match. Oh, it's in this other buffer, right? In Snort 3, you just specify once. You're like, okay, I'm in HTTP URI. Now I want to find foo, bar, bass, like just straight in a row, all nice and easy. Makes it so that all the rule options work as you would expect. Some of his data and some of the other more esoteric ones. It's just logical the way it reads. Also, just makes them shorter, which everyone likes, instead of having this long line that's 200 characters long. That's the main thing. Is just, and like I said, if you write Snort, if you have any familiarity with Snort 2 rules, which a lot of times people share Snort 2 rules, even the FBI shares Snort 2 rules. If you can read those,
it's a language in which network detection is talked about. Right, there's nothing else that you don't exchange TCP dump command line arguments. You talk about Snort.
Exactly, and now it makes it just that much more easy to read and write and modify and figure out what's going on. So there's obviously a lot more, but that's the big thing. It's just easy and reads like a natural language more so.
Yeah, I agree. No, it's definitely some fantastic advantages that I'm glad to see that actually made. Like the ideas that we had in that conference room. Like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do, a single buffer of HTTP URI and put a content match and a regular expression without having to put a /R at the end of a PCRE? Wouldn't that be cool? Or
and what's cool about it,
capital U, yeah.
And what's cool about it is that it's I mentioned before that it's kind of 20 years of experience of writing rules language, like fixed. It's exactly that. It's and also how the configuration changed over time when it was written, who wrote it. Before we had some what are called sticky buffers, file data being one where once you specified it, everything after that sends in that buffer. Well, that was true for file data. It was true for SIP data and a couple others. But other ones like HTTP URI didn't work that way. So you'd have people that would not realize what was sticky and what wasn't. And rules would either not work because they weren't written right and people couldn't figure it out, or maybe they actually would work, but they wouldn't understand why, right? Because it was not doing what they thought they were doing. Which actually brings up to another thing that Snort 3 does, which is it does smart creation of buffers dynamically as you need them. So it does. So what Snort 2 did is it had a lot of overhead creating buffers. It would create every buffer whether it needed it or not. Where Snort 3 waits until it actually needs it. So
it's I'm super excited to see a lot of those things come to fruition finally. So let's talk about the business end of it a little bit, and throw it over to Marty for a little bit. But one of the things, so I took over the open source community at SourceFire in 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. And one of the things I was very surprised to learn, and continually surprised to learn, now being 11 years later or so, or more than that, Chris, is the amount of not only third-party people that use Snort in their product, but the amount of competitors that use Snort in their product. So, Marty, I don't know if you want to talk about that, or if you have anything to say about that particular product, but about that point. But it's always been very impressed to me that a lot of the competition, our competition in this IPS space, is actually ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this was highlighted from the earliest days of the company, really back when I decided to start SourceFire. This kind of fundamental question around how do you get people to pay for something that's free, and how do you compete with the entire world that can pick up your technology and run with it if they choose to. My opinion and my theory on it, which ultimately proved to be correct, was what's now called the open core business model, where you have kind of this open source core, and then you have value added systems around it. SourceFire was geared to sell primarily to business users, businesses, and governments, and so on and so forth. So, kind of pointed at the mid to large enterprise, and the Cisco kind of commercial through large enterprise and governments, and so on and so forth. When you're selling to those organizations, the theory was essentially, let's Snort on the small scale solve problems, so Snort on the large scale causes problems, and the problems that it causes are different than the ones that it solves. And the real issues that enterprises have, to some degree, once you get a level of functionality that's out there, this is the set of functionality that I need to attack whatever problem turns into kind of this larger set of problems around scalability and performance and manageability and stuff like that. So that was the premise of SourceFire, is going out and figuring out which people need this thing to scale and perform, and all the other things we brought to the table. Needed a form factor that performs at a given bandwidth rating and stuff like that. I knew from the beginning that people were going to compete with us, but using our technology, not just compete with us with whatever happened to be out there in the market, up to and including Cisco at the time. But I knew that people were going to pick up Snort technology and run with it as well. But what I found over and over again is that as long as we stayed on the cutting edge of Snort development, as long as we were kind of leading the charge on Snort, we would always be out in front of everybody else, which proved to be the case. We saw it over and over again, where we'd see organizations, competitors, quote unquote competitors, or services organizations and things like that. They would pick up Snort, put it on a box, and kind of they wouldn't curate it appropriately at all. So you'd end up in customer accounts, a few years later, where they're running some Snort, and maybe it's got a really serious bug in it, and it doesn't support the latest rule options, and it's not ready to go on Microsoft Tuesday and stuff like that. So from a business standpoint, it was open source works great as long as you own the projects. And you're willing to drive it forward, essentially, and really be the leading edge and cutting edge of the technology, not just the open source offering that you've got, but the technology space in general. And we really drove, I felt, the intrusion detection and prevention, because threat-based network traffic analysis industry forward pretty aggressively. We added in a bunch of stuff, all the anti-evasion technologies and the target-aware capabilities and things like that. Nobody was doing that, especially not in production systems. We pioneered a bunch of that stuff. It was talked about kind of theoretically. You saw academic papers, and maybe here and there it was kind of sprinkled into some projects that were out there, but nobody was doing it in production, especially in production at multi-gigabit speeds and, defending, large multi-billion-dollar vehicles that were traveling, under the water or, big enterprises or hospitals or whatever. It was really incredible where I started hearing about Snort being used. All the comments, including Antarctica, I'd be contacted by people and things like that were using all these interesting places. So, it was really cool. And the business itself grew pretty well. I wouldn't say it grew as I expected, but the business model worked as I expected it would because, we did what we intended to do from the beginning, which was drive this technology as kind of hard and openly as we felt we could.
Good. So you wound up right where I wanted you to, which was essentially where do you think, or how do you think from a business point of view, how does Snort 3 help that conversation more than Snort 2 did? Right. So how, we obviously we can iterate faster, we can release new features faster, etc.
Well, intrusion prevention systems and next generation firewalls, especially all the threat centric stuff, is an ever evolving problem space, right? So new attack techniques come out, new attacks come out, Microsoft Tuesday happens, OWASP top 10 or 100, whatever, gets updated. You're in this constant adversarial environment, so everything that reduces the friction to bring capability to the table versus the threats that the users of the system face is a big win. Also using the computational resources that are available on modern platforms more efficiently is also a big win. Because, there are limits to these computers we have these days. Nobody really kind of thinks about it. Things are generally fast enough and they work well enough. Stuff's in the sky and things like that. You don't really think about compute the way that we used to, but, for these very earthbound problems, there are attackers who are throwing attacks across these wires that are detectable and can be prevented with technologies like this. What's on the box actually matters and how efficiently you can use it really matters. And the fact that Snort can, be higher performance with the same resources and things like that is a big deal. So, the extensibility of the system, how easily it's extended and how it performs are continue to be impactful. And, every time you're reducing friction there and increasing capability, you're just, it's worth dollars. It's worth a lot of money actually, because it just translates directly into how much time and energy you're spending to get this thing to do its job, or how much time and energy is saving you from having to do instant response jobs because it's doing its thing.
Right. I would let me toss the same question to Patrick. I think I know where you're going to go with this, but same question to Patrick is, what does this, from our business point of view, help us do to protect our customers?
Well, like I mentioned before, it's definitely the modular approach. It's being able to, quickly create new rule options, new capabilities, new inspectors, things that, like I said before, Talos has actually already done, which was something that we could not do. We could have done under Snort 2. It was just so hard. We couldn't do it while it wasn't our primary function. But that mixed with the packaging system that we put together, the improvements there, make it so that, it really makes it possible. Makes the management of policies easier, makes the, pushing out of new capabilities easier.
That's where I want to go.
Perspective, it's just the ability to rapidly add improvements to the engine.
I have to echo the earlier comments about the extensibility and the modularity. That's, from a business perspective, that's probably as close as I get. We also have that backed, of course, by a pretty rigorous process that's way more comprehensive than what we have for Snort 2. So the ability to find and fix bugs and have sustain higher quality, I think, is going to prove out as we go forward, which is really critical because it's pretty complicated at this point, right?
So from a development point of view, Russ, what does this make your life easier? It lowers the amount of points I would imagine that you have to commit to do something, right?
Yeah, you don't have to go to 144 or 230. But Yeah, like I said, there's some things where there's still more work to be done. Obviously,
always.
Yeah. What I'm hoping is that we don't find ourselves looking at a massive rewrite coming up, but that we are in a position to continually evolve. And that includes the architecture. So we want to be, and that's why I keep mentioning the process and the testing. It's why it's so crucial. We want to be able to evolve the architecture to get towards pipeline processing. We're working on, hardware acceleration for the fast pattern searches. There's a number of things that we can do. And then there's some things where if you look at something like, say, Profinet, which is one of these industrial protocols, it can be, ETH, VLAN, and then Profinet. And so we don't have support today to be able to track flows that are not IP-based. So there are some things that require framework updates, but, overall, I think we have it in a pretty good place where we can just continue to evolve, by adding plugins and expanding that way.
So let's go around the table real quick from like a kind of a why. Why do you want users to upgrade from Snort 2 to Snort 3?
Well, I mean, it's a refined architecture. It's 20 years plus of distilled experience with the Snort problem set that it seeks to address, and it's the answers that we came up with via a very deliberate process of not just interaction with the open source community, but also interaction with these tens of thousands of enterprise customers that are out there, as well as having a large professional team of detection creators, essentially, interoperating with the development team as well. I mean, you have to remember where Snort came from in the early days. I was running Snort with, spare bedroom in my house, after I got home from work every day. So a lot of the architectural decisions that have existed for the last 20 years they're distinctly because I was tired one night and I just decided to go in a direction. And, and here we are 20 years later and still there. Snort 3 is 20 years of expertise and exposure to the problem and understanding the theory and application of how and why Snort exists to solve these problems, and making engineering decisions that are more reasoned and seasoned, tempered by experience of the users, and not just the open source community, who I hold near and dear to my heart because they are the people who propelled me to build SourceFire and things like that, but also all of these large professional organizations, enterprises, governments, militaries, universities, hospitals, banks, tech companies that are using this stuff for decades now and have come back to us with, it would be great if, we could get this, or this was easier to do, or, this rule language made more sense, or whatever. So, that's the reason that we want to move to it, because it's 20 years of experience distilled into a new architecture that's attacking the same problem. It's really generated by the same people, so it's not like a complete departure or a totally different system. It is the intelligent evolution of the system we all kind of grew up with and love.
I don't want to fully repeat what I said before, so I'll throw in an extra piece. But a big reason for to me to upgrade and move on to Snort 3 is, like I said, the quick extensibility. That actually even includes if we needed to, we could actually add engine updates, as well, without having to wait for major product release, which is a really cool thing. But like I mentioned before, one of the things that is so much easier is the rule writing. From on the Talos side, we would actually love for everyone to move on to Snort 3 because it makes it easier to train analysts to write really good rules in Snort 3 than in Snort 2. So for my own selfish reasons, I would love to just keep people on that, right? It makes
that's a whole podcast in and of itself, Patrick, of how we've evolved from the way that we used to train people to the way that we train people today. That's a whole other podcast.
Absolutely. And also, because Snort 3 management is done through Lua, I'm actually able to use programming structures to make the management of policies, customer policies and creation of custom policies all so much easier. It makes it it so that as you progress through the different policies in the product or open source, because they're also available in open source now, you get what you would expect regarding inspection depths and performance and how everything balances together.
So I think I would just wax philosophical a little bit here. I think, security is a journey. It's not a destination. And Snort is the same thing. Snort is also a journey. And Snort is the next generation engine that can help, carry folks forward along their journey with IPS and NGFW. The question might be, why wouldn't you update, right? And the only reason you might not want to update is, fear that, it might not be stable or it might have bugs or whatever. But if you're going to have the features you want, you're going to get them through Snort 3. And if we update Snort 2, we're introducing bugs there, right? That's just how development works. So it's really not that big a risk to move forward, but the upside is so much greater. And of course, anyone in open source they're looking at, they can get updates every 2 weeks through GitHub. We do a push every 2 weeks. So it's a much more fluid process.
I think from my perspective, I think from a selfish point of view of one of the guys that manages the amount of traffic that comes off of Snort.org, I would really like everybody to upgrade based upon the fact that we're having to keep 15 versions or something of Snort rules around for the past 5 years because of people's inability or ability to ignore upgrading, right? And so there's versions of Snort that are still around. I think the oldest version that we still keep alive is 2983, if you believe it or not. So if everybody could just upgrade, that'd be just great. That would make my life so much easier. But I echo what everybody else said. But I think at this point, let's toss it back to John. And I just want to thank everybody for coming here today and sitting around and having a chat about this thing that I think is very near and dear to all of our hearts.
Yeah, I thank you guys so much. As somebody who is brand new to Snort, I've only been here for about 3 years now, and only over the past year have I even really gotten a chance to dig into what Snort is and what it does. And it's really cool to be on a fly on the wall and kind of see how far it's come over the years and what you guys have had a chance to do with it. So I appreciate everyone bringing their expertise to the table today. So I just want to wrap up by reminding folks that there's so many other places that we have information on Snort 3 if you want to learn more. Outside of this, you can go to snort.org/Snort3, which is the hub page for Snort 3. We've got a bunch of documentation there. We just released this really cool 2-page summary that I helped put together, and our design team did an awesome job making it look nice and pretty. And basically, it'll give you the TLDR of Snort 3. We also have a ton of blogs on blog.snort.org that you can check out, and Patrick and a bunch of folks from his team and Ross and his team contributed a bunch of blog posts in the months leading up to the release of Snort 3, so you can go there and check out all the archives. And then lastly, I would plug the Snort 101 videos that are already on our Talos YouTube page that you can check out. I'm going to link everything to this in the show notes, so people will have all the URLs and everything like that easily accessible to them. Or if you're already on our YouTube, you can just go to the channel and find the 101 playlist, which if you want to know the basics of installing Snort 3, writing rules, all sorts of stuff, our analysts did an amazing job with those videos. So anyways, yeah, thanks guys so much for doing this. It was awesome.